This is the Quickening Podcast.
My estimation as a former police officer is that there was an oil-like substance that apparently exudes from the body of the entity. It impacts the body subdermally.
This is amazing.
It literally goes into the skin, and you can't wash it off. You can't get it off with any kind of solvent or anything. This is in Chile. The lady got touched by this entity with huge prints on both front and back and left caustic burns on her body. In some of these cases, we'll find a burn mark, and in rare cases, radiation traces where a UFO has landed.
Somebody has come a long, long way. Let's say the reptile, the alien, the mantis, all these other entities. They've come a long, long way to get whatever it is you have, because they don't have it.
In April of this year, a Pentagon official published a report that said, oh, by the way, there's a mothership floating somewhere out there in space, and all the UFOs that we've seen here on Earth, they're probes that come back and forth reporting to that mothership. So, like, if by now you don't believe that aliens exist, that's okay, brother. Living your own reality. With us today is Mr. Derrel Sims. Mr. Sims has dedicated the last 40 years of his life to hunting aliens. Mr. Sims, tell us your story.
I'm a licensed private investigator in the state of Texas. I live in Houston, and I've done this for about 30 some years. Prior to that, I was in the Vietnam War air effort. I volunteered, and in doing that, I ended up in the Central Intelligence Agency for 2 years in covert operations. Now, when I tell you this, you have to understand I'm coming from a position of a great deal of knowledge of over 50 years. So I don't mean to be a know-it-all or anything like that. I'm simply relaying the information as I know it, as an investigator, a former cop, and ex-CIA and all that. But there's some bad players out there too. The bad players, even the Bible says in the 6th chapter of Ephesians where they're at. It says there are principalities, powers, thrones, and dominions, and wickedness in the high places, and they're all located, it said, out there. I was lying in bed, not afraid, not anything, just opened my eyes and I realized somebody's in the room besides me. And that was most unusual because we have a very small house, and my father was a Baptist minister. He's just a straight, perfect, wonderful man, and we've never had a problem with anything. I mean, nothing. So I realized somebody's in my room and they're walking toward the wall, and they don't have any clothes on. I thought, well, what's this all about? So as I looked at it, I thought to myself, he's going to bump into the wall. And he, whatever it was, heard me think that, and as if I had said it openly, which I didn't, and he turned around and I heard him say something that I never had heard it before in my life. I heard him say something in my head. Now this was strange in the very wildest sense of the word to me. I've never heard any other body's voice in my head other than my own. And he said, "It's awake." And I realized he's talking about me because there's no one else in the room besides me and him. And as he turned toward me, he had large black eyes. They were perfectly round, not eyes like the kind you see on Hollywood, that sort of thing. The elliptical eyes you see on aliens in the movies. But he had perfectly round eyes, black, solid black, 1.5 inches across. He was skinny, spindly. I thought he was starving to death. I mean, he was so skinny. And he was a little bigger than I was, a little taller. When he turned toward me, I looked, and I went from his eyes literally down, and I noticed he didn't have a belly button. He didn't have any genitalia. At that point, the alien started to move toward me, and at that moment, only at that moment, did I feel complete, absolute, stark terror. And I didn't know this at the time, but of course, as an investigator, I learned exactly what he was doing and how he was doing it. And what he's doing, he's taking control of me, and he's got to make me not remember. They don't want you to remember these things, especially back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Fear came over me, over my entire body. I mean, I had no idea why or how that could happen, but I'd never felt terror like that in my entire life. I didn't even have bad dreams at age 4. I mean, this was totally alien to me in every sense of the word. So I moved back, I fell back on the bed, and he started walking toward me. And when he did, with those big black eyes, I pushed so hard against my little tiny bed that it pushed me apart from the wall. And the bed, it made a V in the wall in the bed, and I fell. Half of me fell off the bed onto the floor, and I bounced my little head off the floor. And he couldn't get to me at that point. And that's what I was trying to do, is get away from him. And then the worst thing that any child could ever imagine in a bad dream or a bad circumstance, he couldn't get to me that way, so he lifted up the covers underneath my bed and stuck that large bulbous head under there and looked at me with those big black eyes. And I was freaking completely out. At that point, he changed my representation of him into that of a clown. He did not shapeshift. He changed my internal representations in my head to think that he was a clown, and that was going to be the screen memory. That was going to be what I think happened, and that I had a bad dream of a bad clown, and that was it, and I would never remember it. I kept shaking my little head back and forth. No, 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 no. I wouldn't accept that imagery, and that broke his spell. Whatever he was doing to me, it broke his concentration. I wanted to remember him for what he was, not for the clown he wanted me to think he was. And at that point, I went blank, so to speak. And I woke up in the morning, back in bed, not disheveled covers like I normally would have, but perfectly laid out covers over the top of me, which that didn't make any sense. When my mom and dad got up, they looked at me and they were pretty rattled because they realized I was greatly distressed, and they couldn't figure out what the problem was. And they asked me what was wrong. Did you have a bad dream? And so I said no. I never would tell them what the problem was. I never told my mother or dad anything until much later in life. Normally, with any abductee, there are usually events that can happen. Most of the time, they'll happen up into later in your life. In my case, I had approximately 10 events from age 4 to age 17 that went on for 13 years. And my last event was so horrific because what I saw in my last event was 5 beings. Now, kind of strap your seatbelt on for this one. The beings that came into my room in the last event were not the alien. They were the ones who made, hatched, cloned, or manufactured them.
I could see why you're pissed at these things and you're trying to hunt them down. I could totally understand. What did they look like?
You can't even imagine. The best way to describe them is the fallen ones, the fallen angelics.
When you say that, my brain goes to demons. Like, from what I've heard, aliens, from people that get visited by aliens, they leave like marks and stuff on their bodies. And the same is true about demons, or it can be true about demons. Like, demons don't have bodies, but they do leave like scratch marks or burn marks, or like they could physically hurt. Like they've thrown people against walls. Like, that's how powerful they can be. Are you saying that aliens are demons?
The fact is, they're not demonic. Being a student of ancient religions and philosophies and so on, I've studied a lot of this, even in other countries. I've been to India, Turkey, and other places in the Mideast. So I've seen and done a lot of things as an investigator. By definition, a demon is a spirit that has no body. If he doesn't have a body, he's not an alien. Because an alien has a 3-dimensional body. So if the alien is there and he's 3D, you can touch him, he can certainly touch you, and he did, and they do. It's not a demon. the question is, do they do things that are bad or even evil and so on? Absolutely, they do. This has happened. And the point is that the alien and the demon are not the same creature, and no, people should not get them mixed up. Christians and others often do because they don't have any other definition. And some people will come to me and say, well, that had to be a demon, and here's why. Because they can walk through walls, like the one did in your event. And I said, listen to me carefully. I said, don't make me pull your own Bible out or your own religious literature and beat you with it. You're not making sense. Jesus walked through walls too, didn't he? And they thought, what did his apostles say? They were afraid. They thought he was a spirit. Aha! So Jesus obviously wasn't a demon. He obviously wasn't an alien. So how in the world could you do that? You're just simply talking about dimensional skills. These are laws that we're not familiar with, but they are in the spirit world. First of all, let me describe several of the entities that are involved that people refer to as the alien. There is the little gray, which is about 3.5 foot tall. And here's the thing that a lot of people are going to have a problem with, probably. He has an IQ of about 80. That's an IQ of a moron. A lot of the gray aliens, when they bring you back, they'll put you in the wrong location, put your clothes on inside out, backwards. They make huge mistakes, but they're designed, made, hatched, cloned, and manufactured to do exactly the job they're supposed to do, a very simplistic job. The second being that's important is the gray alien that's much taller. He's about 5 foot tall, 5.5 foot tall. That being has got an IQ of about 130, 135. He's very smart, and he knows exactly what to do. The little gray, or you, if you're an abductee, will often refer to him as the doctor. If somebody's going to cut on you or do something awful to you like that, it's going to be him in most cases. So that's his boss, so to speak. Then there's another entity called the mantids, or a praying mantis type being. He's about 7.5 feet tall. I saw him at age in 3rd grade, literally, in Mayhill, New Mexico. He is a horrific being, extremely intelligent, and they have many abductees have an extreme fear of the mantid's face, because he gets that huge triangular face right into yours, and it just mortifies you. And then he does his mental gymnastics or whatever he's going to do with you. The amazing thing beyond him is an entity referred to as the reptile. The reptile being is they're very violent. They're often sexual in nature. They're very difficult on abductees. The other entity I want to mention in brief is something referred to as the Nordic. These are human-like beings that they appear virtually as perfect. People refer to them as Nordics because they're blonde-haired or silver-haired, and they're virtually a perfect human being if you could see them. And they are easier on you than the other entities. They're often called in to calm you down and to make you feel better and all that. But that's generally speaking the main ones, but there's one last one I will tell you about. There are more, but these are the primary ones that show up in UFO events. And the last one, and fasten your seatbelt for this one, is Bigfoot. The Bigfoot is part and parcel to the alien agenda. The best way to think of the aliens is not aliens from other planets. First of all, they're not. I'll demonstrate that in a moment. The aliens, the best way to think about them is models. If you go to the Chevrolet company and you look at the Chevette, the smallest, least impressive car they've got, you might think of that as the little gray alien with the IQ of about 80. You look at the other end of all the cars they've got out there and you can see the big Corvette Stingray. That might be the Nordic as an example. He's far better, far superior in every sense of the word. But they are all models. They're not races of aliens from other worlds. There may be races from other worlds out there. I don't disagree with that. What I'm telling people is that the beings that we're seeing here in these abduction accounts are models. They're made, hatched, cloned, and manufactured for the purpose of interaction with you to make you think they're aliens from other planets. They're not. Let me give you one good example as to why they're not. First of all, if you look at the DNA of each of the alien beings, so to speak, from the gray to the mantis, the reptiles, and so on, you look at their DNA as an investigator, not as a UFO person, as an investigator. I'll start with the mantis being is an example. Where would you get praying mantis DNA on another out in outer space? Probably planet Earth. So probably the mantis comes from here. The reptile, where would you get if you go to land on Neptune or something like that? Not likely you're going to find a bunch of reptile people. If you're going to land on Saturn or some other planet, you wouldn't expect to find Nordics there. Where would you find a Nordic DNA? Probably Norway, I'm guessing. That's the easiest place to get Nordic DNA, would be Norway, here on planet Earth. So, last illustration, where would you get Bigfoot DNA? Probably planet Earth, because that's where the ape and the simian species generally reside. You're not going to find them on Pluto. My illustration here is not based on just an opinion, it's based on some research. When Bigfoot was finally, the evidence of Bigfoot was looked at and studied by DNA by Dr. Melba Ketchum in Nacogdoches, she found two things. Number one, that first of all, he's an ape-like creature. Well, no big shock there. The second thing she found in her DNA research was he had modern human woman DNA, mitochondrial DNA. How can that be? Well, it's called a transgenic. A transgenic is the mixing of two species together. Somebody made, hatched, cloned, or manufactured that thing and put it down here for you to marvel over it. So what we're looking at here in these aliens, so to speak, are beings that have been made, hatched, cloned, manufactured for our observation to fool us for whatever reason. I 100% believe that these particular beings were made by the fallen angelics, and they're a representation of that. Fallen angelics do what? They thwart the plan of God. They do whatever they can to interfere with that. Mankind is one of the big projects that God has on planet Earth. All beings in the universe are made by God, period. The problem is that some of them, I'm going to use a theological term that's not completely accurate. It's called the war in heaven. There's a war in heaven. That term is often used, but it's often used out of context for the actual scripture it's quoted from. The fact is, there certainly was a division in heaven. There's no question about that. And all angels, there are all kinds of classes of them. There are all kinds of amazing creatures, absolutely amazing creatures made by God. He refers to these entities as the B'nai Elohim. That's a Hebrew term meaning sons of God. They are his children, in effect. They are his sons. Now, there was a split one day, one of the most beautiful of all the beings he ever created. I mean, unbelievably wonderful being, named Lucifer, decided, he made a statement that got him in a lot of trouble. He said, I will be like the Most High. I want to be like God. And well, there's only kind of one God position there, and he decided he wanted the job. So he was so beautiful and so incredibly effective at what he does in convincing people of it, or anybody of anything. A third of heaven left with him. These are called the fallen angelics. Now, if you got kicked out of heaven, let's say you buy into this whole narrative, which I do, you got kicked out of heaven by God himself. Now you're out in the universe. So now you are an alien in that sense of the word, because you're not in heaven anymore. And they came, in my opinion, I'll give you a crude example. If you're in a bar, you and your friends get kicked out and you don't like it and you're drunk, you might go to the bartender's house and cause havoc there. And they did. They came to God's special place he had singled out and actually placed mankind on. And originally in the Bible, it's called Eden, the Garden of God. That was the whole planet. It wasn't the Garden of Eden, it was the whole planet. Later, after the fall of man, God placed man in a garden in a much smaller area called Eden, the Garden of Eden itself. So this is amazing, and it's an amazing story because guess who's the first being that shows up in the Garden of Eden after Eve is created? A reptile. Came walking into the Garden of Eden, and some people say, well, it's called a serpent. That's true. From a theological point of view, there are three definitions of the word serpent used in the Hebrew. It's a triple entendre. The first one describes the serpent-like the skin is a good example. And second describes him as is upright and walking like a dragon, a reptile. The third one describes his actual personage, and it's called the Shining One, the Light Bearer, Lucifer. Most people are reading the Bible so quickly they don't even stop to even analyze the words where they came from. This is the real story of the Garden of Eden. And Lucifer came there and seduced the woman. He attacked the family. The first thing he told her was, if you eat of this forbidden fruit, you will be like gods, to know good and evil, to do all these things. She didn't know anything about evil. Didn't know anything about anything. And he came after her first, because he knew if he could get her, that the man, and he did, when he saw what she was doing, Adam wasn't deceived. The scripture says, the Apostle Paul said, Adam was never deceived. He eat of the fruit himself because he chose to die with her rather than to live forever without her. Now, this Apostle Paul, if you want to go into the Bible, it says the same thing. It calls the Lord Jesus Christ the second Adam, that he gave himself also for us, the church, so to speak. And he gave himself, having no sin, to save us rather than to live forever without us. So it was a beautiful picture of what Christ was going to do when he came. So the being that came in the Garden of Eden, that so-called snake everybody talks about, was an upright standing being that was talking to her and convinced her completely that it was okay to do this. And of course it wasn't. That was one of the fallen beings. He was the leader of the ones that came to earth. They were originally called the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. They were called the Watchers. They're the fallen ones. They are fallen angelics, and they are powerful. They're still beautiful. They're magnificent. They're amazing creatures, but they are fallen. And the difference between them and unfallen angelics, if I met a real angel and a fallen angel, what would be the difference? The unfallen angel will not accept worship. The fallen ones will. Lucifer wants to be worshipped. So do his fallen crew. There's a world of difference between the two. And belief is a difference. There's a difference between belief and what I can prove. I can prove some of these things because some of these angelics even show up in UFO events to help and save some of these people from very horrific situations. That's even happening in my own home. So I can't prove that to anybody, but I can show evidence of it for sure. And certainly the witnesses, the abductees that were spared from horrific events by these fallen ones, is an indicator, at least from their viewpoint, that God cares about us, and he's trying to do something to assist us in that way. So I do believe that there are angelics that care for us, watch us. The scripture in the Apostle Paul said angels are so amazed even about women that they watch their hair grow. I mean, they're just stunned that there's nothing like us anywhere. They may be bigger than us, powerful than us, all kinds of better stuff than us, but the fact is God made us for a particular reason down here, and he doesn't like anybody tampering with them. That's why we've got guardian angels.
But aren't those Nephilims? I mean, I have heard that the Nephilim weren't extinguished after the flood because, well, David had to fight Goliath, and that's way after Noah. Even though it was like a lesser, shorter version of the giants that used to live before Noah, they were still giants. And because what I've heard is that like Nephilim, because they were banished from heaven, they have nowhere to go. They were earthbound because they can't go technically to hell yet, because not until the last days are they allowed to go receive punishment. So that they're technically like earthbound is what I've heard from men of God. So are you saying that aliens are Nephilim taking on a new form?
Great question, Marcia. The Nephilim, the Hebrew word Nephilim, it means to fall, or it means a bully or a giant. There are different words that can describe it. These are the giants of the Old Testament. In the 6th chapter of Genesis, it says the B'nai Elohim, that means the fallen angels that were there. There were fallen angels on the earth in those days. And later, the giants appeared, and they began to describe what happened. The giants are the fallen offspring of a mixture between women and the fallen angels. They interbred with these women, and if angels are amazing and powerful and the sons of God, I mean, some other type of entity, and it bred with a human being, what would the offspring be? Well, one quick example, the giants, their children would be giants. And so they were. There were at least three races of giants mentioned in the Old Testament: the Anakim, the Zuzanim, and the Emim. These are the ones that when the children of Israel went over into the land of Canaan, they said, there are giants over there. We can't go over there. We can't conquer this town. Oh my God, we were like grasshoppers in their sight. That is not an exaggeration. The giants were huge. And I'll give a couple of examples. I sent you some pictures of Enli and Enki of Samaria, of the Sumer. In Sumer, these were two leaders, two giants. People think they were just kings of old ancient times. No, they were actually not only kings, they were giant kings. One of them in the carvings that I sent you shows Enli literally sitting on the throne, and all the people in front of him, like the humans in front, were about the height of his knee while he's sitting down. The interesting thing, in another relief, they got a carving of him, shows him holding a cat, like a kitten. It's a full-grown lion. He's holding it like it's a normal cat. I mean, the stories about these things are so. The scripture goes on and describes this is where the ancient legends of giants and things like that came from. And Enli and Enki are two. They were brothers in Sumer. Goliath, you remember the story of David? He fought Goliath and killed him and so on. The reason David went down into the dry valley there and picked up 5 stones wasn't because he thought he was going to miss 4 times. The scripture, if you read further, says Goliath had 4 brothers. David intended to kill all 5 of them. All of them. When he killed Goliath and chopped off his head, the 4 brothers and the rest of the Philistines took off as fast as they could in the other direction. They realized this is not a guy you want to mess with. Goliath was only 9 foot 6 inches tall. And like most giants, not all giants, but most giants had 6 fingers. Not 5, but 6. And I've sent you a picture of some of the handprints we have of some of the aliens. One of the alien abduction accounts in Chile is a good example, is based on our research and everything, appears to have 6 fingers. It's a polydactyl giant. The handprint goes from one side of the woman's body to the other side on both sides, where he picked her up and walked off with her and left caustic burns on her from just the touch alone. So that's the David and the Goliath part. Then when you go down to the Aztec land in ancient Mexico, and a wonderful history down there, and I've been there, it's absolutely amazing. You meet this guy called Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl is an interesting character. Are you ready for this? He's the feathered serpent. And he's the one that many of the Aztecs thought was. Now, think about Native Americans. I want to straighten this out because I'm part Native myself, and it bothers me to see them get thrown into the bin, believing all kinds of stupid things. It's just not true. Native Americans overall had great respect for any entity that wasn't them, like an alien as an example, or Quetzalcoatl, anything. They didn't necessarily worship them, but they had respect for them. Later, when the scientists in 1929 went up to Machu Picchu with the Peruvian natives, is a good example. They went up there and the scientists were stunned. They said, "Oh my gosh, look at this incredible cities of stone you built up here. This is amazing. How could you have ever done that? You must be proud of your people." And the Peruvians looked at the scientists and said, "We didn't build this. The giants did. Giants of ancient times." So what I want to tell your audience is the great stone things that you see, not all of them, but many of them, all over the world in history, the giant stone things that were built, some of them unimaginable how it could have been done, were done by the giants. I call it the Stone Age. Not the time where people are throwing rocks at each other, but the age of stone for the giant. It was their history. Their history, not yours, that was important. That's the truth of it. So Machu Picchu is just one example. There are many, Cusco, many other examples all over the world. It doesn't matter. You can go any country, anywhere, even in the United States. You go to the United States, theologians, scholars were horrified at some of the stories the Indians told. They said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh yeah, we fought a bunch of these giants." The native tribe mentioned this, and of course, these people thought, "Well, you're nuts. You're making this up." And no, we cornered them in a giant cave up here, and we got in a fight with them, and we finally smoked them out and shot them with arrows and killed what was left of them. Why'd you do that? Because they were eating our children. That's historically, this is the fact. The giants are huge. If they're that huge, they're going to run out of food at some point. So the ancient tribes and ancient peoples, and when God said go to the land of Canaan, he said, when you find them, kill them all. Don't let any of them live. You're gonna regret it, and if you do, they're going to come after you. And they killed the Zanzamim, the Emim, and the Anakim. What happens to giants when they die? Well, that's really interesting, because according to the Bible, when a giant dies, in the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, he calls the Rephilim, which is one of the generic terms for all giants, the Rephilim. He said, when they die, they will not rise in the resurrection, because they're not human. In other words, they're still here. Where does the demon come from? They're the giants. In cases I've worked in demonism with different people, and what I've actually questioned the demon in present, and if you can ever get them to tell the truth, they'll admit that they're a giant 35,000 years old. Take the Bible for what it's worth. It says that's who they are. It says they're, in other words, when the giant dies, he gets killed, he's still here. Now he's looking for a body to inhabit. That's called possession.
And where do they go? Where do aliens live?
a NASA scientist, believe it or not, who's now deceased, but he wrote a book called Ringmakers of Saturn. You can find the book online. You can pay about $300 for it, or you can get it for free, downloaded on the internet. It's called Ringmakers of Saturn. And in that book, he describes exactly where the aliens are located, at least one group of them. Where would that be? He said, in the rings of Saturn. Now, I'm going to tell you a quick story. Because some people are going to say, well, Derrel's a wacko, he's weird, he's crazy, and he's making all this stuff up. Really? Well, does anybody know who the Jet Propulsion Lab people are? They're the people that make all the rovers and equipment that are sent to the moon and Mars and places like that before we send pilots. They invited me to the JPL, which is located right out there in Pasadena. You probably know where it's at a JPL meeting where they were launching the first nuclear package spacecraft called the Cassini project. I was there the night that presentation was done. They know who I am. They know what I do. Invited me anyway. At the end of the presentation, it was an amazing presentation, very scientific, way above my pay grade. They asked if anyone had any questions, and I said, I have questions. My first question, I said, I'm first of all impressed with the JPL and the things you've done and the roving equipment you've got on Mars right now and the things you've done on the moon. And this is amazing. We're so proud of you as Americans. I said, however, one day we just left the moon, just drove off and left and never did another thing. And I said, I won't ask why, but it's a good question. I said, then we took off and headed toward Mars. Now you guys have got a rover on Mars, and I'm very proud of that. Then all of a sudden you took a left turn and you went to the rings of Saturn and the Jovian system with this new project called the Cassini project. I said, why did you leave the moon, leave Mars, and head toward the two big planets that we have, Saturn and Jupiter? What is it you found there that interested you more than what you were already finding on Mars? You could have heard a pin drop in that entire huge building. And all of a sudden, the speaker said, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending tonight. Free drinks and food for everybody in the back, and a free gift for everyone. Thank you. And they just looked at me, just this, can't believe you asked the question. I'm sure a lot of people in that room would like to know the answer to that too. But the fact is, if you read the Ringmakers of Saturn, guess where the scientist claims the aliens are at? They're in the Cassini ring of Saturn, just like the spacecraft.
Wow, that's the first time I hear that. That's crazy.
They're also located on the moon, and they're also located. One of the scientists, I'll send a lot of this information to your audience if they want it. It's free. It takes me a while to do it. But one scientist who was the major geologist for the NASA project, for the moon project, Farouk Elbaz is his name, he said, there are huge spires all over the moon. That's funny, I didn't see any of those in any of the pictures NASA had taken. He said, they're all over the moon. He said, huge spires that are much taller than the tallest buildings we have on Earth. He said, and they're not made from the Mara or the sand or the soil near there. He said, they're of a totally different color. They're all over the moon, and they're much higher than the Empire State Building. They're much higher than the Empire State Building. And they're all over the moon. Funny, not one of them showed up in the NASA photos.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much good, solid evidence out there, you'd be stunned. Like I said, I've done this for 50 years. I actually know what I'm talking about.
That's crazy. I always wonder why we don't see like more video of people walking on the moon like they did the first time, supposedly.
Because you got to block out all those other things that are on the moon, like spires and UFOs. Even some of the astronauts, the first ones went to the moon, finally admitted after they retired, we saw UFOs on the moon watching us. Some of the statements they made said, Houston, we've got somebody watching us, and you're thinking it's somebody in their, it's their people. They're not talking about that. I actually have some downloaded photos given to me from NASA. It was stolen from NASA of UFOs on the moon. They were sitting there in the air, in the sky, watching us rove around on the moon with our little moon rover.
Mr. Sims, you've written a lot of books about your investigations and stuff like that. And the one book that really shocked me was the one about the implants, because you have colored photos and you have corroborating reports by men of substance in government. And that was crazy to me. Can you explain to us what implants are?
The best way to think of the alien implant is something inside you that you don't know about that allows them to monitor or do whatever they want to do. And there's nothing you can do about it until it's removed. I discovered implants in 1960 in my own event because I was implanted at age 12 in 1960. The only problem was when they switch you off, I figured out how to switch myself back on. And I heard what they were saying, what they were thinking, and I've done that in my events. That's why I know so much about the aliens. It's not because I'm unusually smart. It's because I was simply awake and they didn't know it. I was listening to their thinking and what they were doing and saying, and we were not supposed to hear. So that's the first thing. I was implanted myself, and that's where I learned that information. The second thing is I got to thinking at age 12, probably other people have been implanted too. I can't be the only one. And I started researching this in the 1980s, and I started finding people who did in fact have implantations that they reported. In 1995, we did the first 2 implant surgeries in Camarillo, California, and we removed 4 objects from 2 people, 3 from a lady and 1 from a man, from his hand, 3 from her foot. The objects were studied at Los Alamos and New Mexico Tech by the NIDS Foundation. For those of you who think that we made all this up and it's crazy, you're wrong. The National Institute for Discovery Science, a group of 18 scientists, one of the owners of that group, a man named Bob Bigelow, who headed that group, and he confronted me and said, we would like to have you do a presentation for us. We did. That presentation netted us 18 scientists all agreed that we should study these implants, and we sent the objects to be studied in a blinded study at Los Alamos and New Mexico Tech in New Mexico, and they found the objects to be rare meteorites from another world. And they found the biology surrounding it was even stranger than that.
I want to show you something rather remarkable. You can see the little objects here, the perfect T and the one off to the side.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we had them surgically excised, and here's what we found. Here's a good look at them after they're taken out. There was a biological cocoon surrounding these originally.
This is bizarre.
Someone is doing this. This is entity related. So in my opinion, we're looking at real, actual evidence of these cases.
The important thing to know about the alien implant is they're not microchips. They're not anything like what we have. They are, if you find a microchip in you, I assure you some human did that. If the alien implant is inside you, I promise you, it has no technology that's discernible. It doesn't work like that. It's not like anything you understand. It's not designed to do that. One of the things it could do is affect your neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. It could cause you to great sadness, to say the very least, and other things. It will affect your behavior if they choose to do that. The implants, some of them are metallic, some of them appear to be ceramic, some of them appear to be plastic-like material, some of them are biological in nature. We really don't know much about them. I know more than probably most anybody, but even then, I know a lot less than I would like to know. However, if you've seen a UFO or been close to a UFO or seen an alien, you've already been programmed. You don't need an alien implant. They already did what they're going to do to you. They already did it. The best way to think about programming from the alien, they leave apps inside you, an application. One of the apps that you'll see I'll go, okay, a good example. I'll go to a UFO conference and I'll ask, how many of you have actually seen a UFO? Hands will go up. How many of you actually had them do something to you? Of course, a lot of them are thinking implantation. Hands will go up, less hands. How many of you, regardless of the fact that your parents loved you, cared for you, and all of that, you feel all alone? You have no idea why, but you almost clinically feel all alone. You don't know why, even though your parents love you and care for you. And most of the hands that go up in that room that are abductees. And in fact, all of them I've ever seen. And then the last question I ask you is this: how many of you people, even though you know your parents loved you, cared for you, and everything else, and even though you feel all alone, and in fact, you know you're all alone, you know it. You don't feel it, you know it. I said, that's an app. And the next thing I tell them is, how many of you actually think your parents are not your parents? And the same group of hands will go up. Even though you know genetically that's not true. The alien's purpose, one of his purposes, is to destroy your relationship with your family. What did the reptile do to Eve? Tried to split the family. What does the alien do? One of the first things they do, they come to you when you're a child, mimicking, and they'll tell you that your parents are not your parents, that we are, that we're here to help you save the planet, fix seals on hold, do all kinds of wonderful things. They'll tell you that from childhood. It makes you doubt your very parents. Why in the world would God make a planet like this, put us on it, and beings from other worlds want to come here to get what you have? And the fact that God sent forth his own son to die and to be our Redeemer and to spare us and save us from our own insanities. I mean, we think we're so smart, we've got nuclear bombs pointed at each other. And what's that going to solve? I mean, this is crazy. The only thing I think we better look for is a spiritual deliverance rather than a physical one. I don't think your bombs are going to save you. Our history is literally going to be rewritten in the next 20, 30 years, because we're going to find, and are already finding, that the history we were told is very limited, and it is skewed in my viewpoint. So I think at some point we're going to have to realize that God, in his infinite greatness, created the heavens and the earth. He did it fast, he did it powerfully, he did it, wow. I mean, this is amazing. And this thing is so huge, you can't even think to the end of it. It's so big. We're not the only ones, and we never have been. We are a special creation. You are unique in the universe. They know it. About the only persons that don't know how unique you really are human beings.
Where can people get more information about your investigations? Like, where can they go see all these pictures? Where can they get your books? And also, like, where can people go and find you? Because, like, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that think that they've been visited by aliens, or maybe they have, I don't know. But where can they find you so they can get your help? Because I know that you do help people still.
You can go to thealienhunter.com, and it'll instantly pull up everything you want. You can click on me, and it will automatically give you my address. You can ask any questions you want. You can ask. We have scientists who write us, because scientists are getting abducted too. We have 3 NASA scientists that are abductees, and they don't know what to do. They can't go to NASA and tell them. I mean, you want to get fired, that's the way to do it. So you can ask any questions you want. My answers are free to you. It's a free service. This is what we do. And if you want to see our evidence and things like that, and you want to look at it from a scientific point of view, you can do that. You want to look at it as an abductee point of view, you can do that. We have everything there available for you to do that. And we're happy to help you in any way we can.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Sims. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, dear.
And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like our video and subscribe to our channel, and tune in next time. This is the Quickening Podcast.